Hello, everyone, and welcome to TC Academic Festival. I am so incredibly proud and thrilled to be back at my alma mater, at least in virtually here from LA. And I'm so glad to be here. I'm especially excited to get to talk with Yolanda in a little bit. And I'm so grateful to you, Elisa, and to Rosella for all you've done to put this incredible event together. So hello and welcome again. My name is Fanshin. My bio is kind of there so you can see a little bit more about that. But I also like to start off my presentations by kind of telling you a little bit more about my first name. Fanshin is how I pronounce it. It's actually Chinese and it means to turn over or to turn the body over. And I'm actually not the best person to even tell you about my name. I kind of mess it up when I do it. So I didn't ask for permission from Rosella or Elisa, but I've actually brought a couple of people with me, actually three people, because they're just better at telling you the story of my name. So you're going to be meeting my Jamaican grandmother. Hold on. Okay, I know. Hold on. My Jamaican grandmother and my Pan-Africanist father, and my white mother. Granddaughter. Me only granddaughter. Come, come. Sit down here like you used to when you was a little girl and make me braid on no hair. Yes, okay, that's right. Now, me have a favor to ask of you. The next time now you call your mommy and your daddy, ask them for me. What in God's name is a Fanshin? Me never could say that name. That's why me just call you my granddaughter. Why them give you that name? Oh, well, hello, everyone. Hi, TC Academic Festival. Oh, my goodness, it's so great to see you all. Oh, you're beautiful. Oh, thank you for joining in. Okay, now, I can't wait to tell you about how I gave her name. But I just need to mention one thing because, well, when she introduced me, she told you that I was white, and I do have something to say about that. Okay, so I'm Mama Trudy, and I am Blackfeet Indian and Cherokee and Danish. No, I know. I know that some of you might take one look at me and just decide that I am white, but I sure as hell don't feel white. I do not. Okay. No, and now Fen Shen, she doesn't know, but we decided to make her on purpose. No, okay, so now her name. Now, you see, let's see, now, I was your father's TA at the University of Oregon. And yes, I was his TA, and he was teaching political science. And we started reading lots of revolutionary stuff, doing analysis on Marxism and Mao, and we used to go to these meetings. Oh, and one time we won a trip to Alabama to visit a family of Black Panthers. We did. It was a drawing out of a hat in one of my most leftist groups, the one where we did embroidery for the Viet Cong. Now, let's see now what happened. I had also just gotten out of jail. Well, they arrested me for protesting some Bolivian dictator statue, and I'm in jail, and I tell them, I say, you know what? You better let me out because I got to go breastfeed my baby or you're going to see milk all over the place. And then they just let me right out. They did. Okay, I'm sorry. No, anyway, okay, your name, Fan Shen. Well, your father and I, we're reading the book Fan Shen together, and we are really close. The closest we ever were. Okay, now. You see, back in those times, I was very interested in the socialist revolution, especially in the form of a village program. You see, I wanted to find a place to raise you kids to be competent and self-respecting and also socially conscious citizens. A place where racial and class oppression was absent, you see. So I do some research on how different countries go about doing that, and then I saw that book all about China and the revolution, and I was so taken up with it that Well, we decided to name you after. So I always like to start with names because, first of all, I think many of you know as teachers and teacher administrators that it's a great way to get to know your students and for them to know you is to share about your name. How did you get your first name? How did you even get your last name? What's kind of the history behind that? And so I always start most of my workshops and things with really examining our names. And not just our names, but also what is the historical context behind how we got our names. So you can probably guess the timing of when I was born based on the stories my parents share with Black Panthers and kind of my mom getting in jail for protesting. And so I was born in 1970. And that historical context says a lot, not just about the name I was given, but also all of the ways in which I identify myself and how I identify myself in terms of my race, in terms of my gender, all of the things that were happening at that time and everything that came before that all inform how I ended up having the identities that I have. And so I've had this incredible luck, I have to say, and fortune of having been able to share my show, One Drop of Love, across the country. And I'll be sharing some more excerpts from this show. So I didn't say in the beginning that my parents telling that story are excerpts from the show, but have had this incredible luck to be able to go across the country and share this show for about 7 years. I also work in Hollywood, really kind of helping my production company, Pearl Street Films, to make sure that the stories we're telling are more representative of what the world actually looks like. And I've come up with this mantra for storytelling and thinking about how do we tell our personal narratives in a way that they actually have an impact, a social impact, that we're doing some good in the world by sharing our stories. And so this mantra that I have is truth, justice, and love. Truth, justice, and love. And I think about that kind of every morning as I wake up. I think about it as I look at people's scripts and determine if I think I can help them tell their stories. I certainly think about it as I'm writing and doing more creative writing. Truth, justice, and love. So I want to start by talking about truth and what I mean by that, because sometimes I get some pushback on that and people are like, well, whose truth? I mean, what do you mean by truth? And especially now, I think we've seen in the last 4 years with our administration, there are some deep, complex, and scary conversations around what truth is. And my response to that is the non-dominant narrative. Because it's in the non-dominant narratives that we really can start to pick apart the things that we've been told to believe, the limited stories we've been told, to start to pick those apart and understand broader reasons for who we are and how we identify today. And so with truth, I really think a lot about historical context. So not so much our current narrative, but really digging in and looking at what are the non-dominant narratives of our historical past and our historical truths. One great example right now is the ways that we recently, across the country in many states, are officially celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day versus what many of us grew up calling Columbus Day, and really telling the truth about Christopher Columbus and not just these one-sided kind of uplifting heroic stories of people that we've been told to consider heroes, but telling the full truth about their atrocities as well. So in the play, I share another truth, a story of my father and I entering into college. And so he immigrated here from Jamaica in the 1950s. So his sharing is from 1958 when he started school, and mine is from 1988 when I started at the University of Michigan. Go Blue, if anybody here is a Michigan fan, and so sorry if you're not. So this is another example of truth telling and looking at historical context between these two different people with different identities. So again, you'll hear from my dad and from me in college. Well, now it is my very first week at California Polytechnic State College, and it's 1958. Now, I'll never forget that I'm on the bus or on the way to school, and this white lady comes and she sits down next to me. And I tell you that I am so afraid of this white woman sitting next to me on the bus. You see, my friends back in Jamaica had warned me, you will get lynched for talking to a white lady, and I had read that. And I'd seen that in the movies too. So this lady tried to talk to me, but I wouldn't say a word. It is my very first week at the University of Michigan. And, well, I'm starting to notice kind of this really, really strange thing happening to me. Total strangers, women and also men, nodding their heads at me as I pass by. I know I did not meet that many people in this very first week of school. And then one day it hits me. All of the faces of the people saying hello to me randomly are black and brown. It's like they're profiling me. I mean, but how did they know? Everyone told me I was always too high yellow. It's like I'm getting this big old giant hug from a community that recognizes me. And I like it. Well, now it turns out that this white lady sitting on the bus, she's from Turkey. She doesn't even speak any English. She wants to talk to me because we're both foreign students, but I can't do it. Now, when I get to the campus, I see how things really are going to be. There aren't any other black students. I'm completely surrounded by whites 24 hours a day. I feel very self-conscious about my accent, and I lose it as quickly as possible. I put my head down and I just go to class. You see, back in Jamaica, I was aware of being a lower class person, but I had never felt shackled. You see. But here, now, in the US, suddenly I was in a position of permanent inferiority. I had become a racial being. So one night, it's like really, really early in my freshman year. I'm hanging out in a dorm room, like you do with some friends. And this guy Charles with really, really light skin and steel blue eyes like mine. He walks up to me and he's like, "So, sister, you joining the Black Student Union?" Oh, me? Oh, me. No, Charles. No, I'm not. I'm not really joining the Black Student Union because actually, I'm Jamaican, but I'm also Cherokee and I'm Danish. And you what? Oh my gosh. Okay. See, no. I see what you're saying. No, no, I meant what I meant to say. Oh, yes, yes. I'm definitely black. I am. I'm not only black. Mhm. So, let me ask you something. If it came down to it and you had to choose, what would you choose? Okay. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I don't have to choose. So, yeah, that's true. That's true. You do not have to choose because they have already chosen for you. You see, during slavery, the slave masters would rape their slaves and produce these mulatto children. And then they had to decide what to do with these babies. Were they free or were they slaves? They created laws that stated that one drop of African blood made you a slave. The slave masters created the one drop rule to enslave their own children. And these laws remain very much in effect through Jim Crow and continue to be used today to determine who has access to housing and education, and healthcare, and wealth. Well, now I decide to spend the summer now after my freshman year in New York City. Now, I don't have the money to fly there, but I have a couple of classmates and they're driving cross country. It's a Chinese guy and a Jew, and they're very friendly guys. Now we're on a coffee break in Idaho, and this waitress, yes, refuses to serve me. It was the first time I would see the look, the look I would see many, many times over in America, the look that told me my very presence was an offense. Um, I become super sister. I wear some big ass brass earrings in the shape of Africa and a red, black, and green leather emblem of Africa around my neck. I grow all the relaxer out my hair. I blast Public Enemy, Poor Righteous Teachers, and X-Clan through my Walkman earphones while snapping my gum, rolling my eyes at Whitey, and daring anybody to question my racial identity. And I take pictures like this. And by my sophomore year, I am profiling all the light-skinned freshman mixies and giving them the nod so they know where their loyalties should lie. So that's one of the things I do in this show in One Drop of Love, and I push content creators and storytellers to do constantly is to now take not just this historical context that we're digging into and really telling the truth about, but also what happens when we juxtapose two different times together. So with my father and I, one of the things I look at is what happens in the 1950s to a Jamaican immigrant versus the 1980s to the daughter of that immigrant. Where do we stand in terms of race relations, as an example? Why did my father have to make the choices he made, and why did I have to make the ones I made? And some of it is will and our own reasons for our choices and our own will, but a lot of it is historical context. So for my father, he had to lose his accent. He had to go inwards. He had to almost disappear his culture in order to survive. And for me, I went in the opposite direction. I felt like I had to perform Blackness, both to learn about it for myself as well as to let people know, because I was insecure about them being able to read it on my own body. So with your stories and with the ways that you talk to your students and your teachers and your staff, think about always digging in and going further than the surface, because we're never telling the full truth when we're at the surface. I'll end this portion with another important story that I like to share in workshops and conversations around storytelling. Another important truth, and especially this is one that Hollywood just is so not ready to hear, and therefore I tell it all the time as much as possible, pushing for this story to be presented and to be told. And that is the story of Takao Oza and Bhagat Singh Thind versus the United States Supreme Court. So in the 1920s, in order to become a naturalized citizen, after having immigrated to the United States, you had to prove that you were white. It was the only way that you could become naturalized. Now, there were some provisions for people of African descent because we were brought here enslaved, and they couldn't come up with enough excuses to not allow us to become naturalized. But otherwise, you had to prove that you were white. And so Takao Oza was a Japanese man, immigrated here 20 years before his court case, and came for school, went to Berkeley, very, very smart man, and did everything he could to prove to the Supreme Court that he was white. So he lived in an all-white neighborhood. He attended all-white churches. He never allowed his wife or his children or himself to speak Japanese at home. They only spoke English. He did everything possible, including, he says in his court case, that he never goes out in the sun. And he is sure that he can win this case and prove that he's white. Again, in the 1920s, the Supreme Court looks over his case, and they come back with the decision that he cannot become a naturalized citizen, because the scientists make it very clear that you have to be born in a particular region, and that would make you Caucasoid, and therefore, if you're not born or heritage from this particular region, you are not considered white, and therefore you will be denied your citizenship. They deny him his citizenship. 3 months later, just 3 months later, and in fact, during Ozawa's trial, a man named Bhagat Singh Thind, who was born in India, is watching Ozawa's trial very carefully and actually excitedly, because he is wealthy, which was certainly a way that you could become white in this country, is to pass for white or take on whiteness, was to have money. He served in the military. He is sure that he has, and best of all, most importantly, the scientists are including India in the region that makes a person white or Caucasian. And so he excitedly brings his case. He knows he's going to become a citizen. And again, 3 months later, the Supreme Court takes a look at his case, and they say, actually, science is not reliable to determine this. Instead, we're going to rely on the common man, and the common man knows that you are not white. I know I don't have to tell the TC community why this historical context is so incredibly important for all of us to know, and why this is a story that needs to be told widely. But every time, this latest story about 545 children not knowing where their families are, based on those laws, and I almost called them lies because they are, based on those laws that purported to determine whether or not someone was white, and therefore determine the rest of their lives, the access to resources. If we don't tell those stories, we continue to perpetuate the ideology of white supremacy that has led to so much deep harm. We're seeing it daily. So tell the truth in your stories, insist on the truth in historical stories, dig into the hard conversations, truth, justice, love. When we tell the full truth, that can point us in the direction of justice and where we pursue justice. Without telling those truths, we can constantly think that we are pursuing justice, but if we haven't told the full truth, we're missing aspects of where we need to pursue justice. So tell the truth. And based on that truth in your stories, we're relying on you to tell your truthful stories and the historical truthful stories, we can pursue justice. And that is what love looks like. So it's my TC community. Hugs are beautiful. I love you all. I'm all about hugs. I'm all about expressing love. But in reality, the best way to express love is to tell the truth and to pursue justice based on that full truth. That's what love looks like. And now I am so excited to bring on someone that I am fully in love with.
I'm in love with you.
Because she is all about truth and pursuing justice. So,
Attention, can I, first of all, let me bring greetings and peace and love to the TC community. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Just allow me a moment, both a fangirl moment, to just tell you what you just performed touched my heart so deeply. I cannot thank you enough for bringing this to the TC community, for the work that you do in Hollywood and abroad, for the work that you do of justice, pursuing justice through your podcast, Sister Brunch, all of the work that you do, what emanates from that is your mantra of truth, justice, and love. And so I thank you. I thank Rosella. I thank Elisa. I thank President Tom Bailey and Provost Raleigh and all of my TC community colleagues who have pulled this together. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
And now, my goodness, my head is going in so many different directions, but the first thing that comes out of my mouth is to say stories matter. And I think about Chimamanda Adichie. I think about T.T. Toni Morrison. I affectionately call her T.T. In my mind, I am related to her and James Baldwin and a host of other people.
No,
they just don't know it, right?
Yes.
Indeed, stories matter. And that's really, I just want to stop with that. I have a list of things I want to share, but I want to ask you, how did that feel for you? And then let us flow where we're going to flow with this.
To your point about stories mattering, I have to share that at the time that I created One Drop, I was in a rough place as a storyteller. I kind of lost my way, especially being in Hollywood and being in this very limited mindset about the stories that could be told. And fortunately, I found a great very affordable MFA program here in Los Angeles at California State University, LA, and that helped me find my voice again. But I remember as I developed the show, I let go of any kind of Hollywood pressure around what kind of story I would tell, and I remember thinking, if I do this in my living room and my mother loves it and is proud of me, and if maybe this helps me bring me closer to my father, then I've achieved my goal. And to your point about stories mattering, there's so much depth that can come out of telling your story that you just don't know. And so let go of any particular outcome of it and just allow yourself to tell the story, because It's everything. It's the greatest gift you can give yourself is to tell your story.
And speaking of that, and I know you've spoken publicly about your father, your dad. How is that, if you don't mind? How is that now? And how has telling his story, your mom's story, this conglomeration of stories, how has that impacted where you are today with him?
Oh, I'm so fortunate that the show really did have the impact of helping our family get closer together. So I'll give very quick context, which is at the top of the show, I make it very clear that I'm a Black woman. I'm sure I'm going to marry a Black man. I'm going to have Black children, and I'm teaching ESL and to adults. And a new student walks in my room, and I kind of have this love at first sight moment, but he's Italian. And my immediate thought is like, OG colonizer, absolutely not, But I find myself falling in love with this man, and eventually we, get engaged. And I am very anxious about telling my Pan-Africanist father, both worried about hurting his feelings and also what am I saying about myself and about my self-love and about loving Blackness. And so I do eventually invite my father to the wedding, and then he doesn't come. And so the show is kind of this journey around what is all of the historical context around our identities and this contemporary moment that led to my having my wedding without my father there. So that's a little bit of context, and doing the show has been this incredible catalyst for our family around truth telling.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what it's done for us, and not to say everything got fixed, but we tell the truth, and I'm so grateful for that.
And I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful to Rosella Garcia, particularly for putting us together, because as I was listening, and we talked a little bit before the show came on, the 2 degrees of separation, right, that we have. But I'm so grateful that she put us together, because your work, I think, beautifully aligns with what I try to do in my work. Yeah. And so as there's a couple of things that came to mind. Before I get to that, I want to thank you for what you said around names and the importance of, as we teach, to encourage our students to get to know the names and the correct pronunciation of your students' names. And so usually in my class here at Teachers College, I ask students to engage in name stories. And I think a bit about Sandra Cisneros in her house on Mango Street. There's that vignette of Esmeralda, the meaning of her name. Ralph Ellison has done some beautiful work on short stories around names. And so to tell the name story often shows the connection, not just to the person that named them, but also often culture is emerging from that. There are so many things that are connected, and particularly if you're named after someone who has passed on, it's very significant to have that pronunciation right. So I wanted to thank you for that.
I'd love to talk about that a little bit more, because so one thing I'm always careful with, especially when we look at names in workshops, is honoring those who may have changed their names, let's say because it does not fit their gender identity or their racial identity, or and then also with adoptees as an example, where I mean, none of us really got to choose our names because our parents or grandparents or birth parents or adoptive parents chose for us. So we're all in that position, but especially for adoptees, it's something that's really important to think about. But I do an exercise with everyone, which is to look at, and this is what I did with the show, is look at those few years leading up to the time that you were named. So we do this writing exercise around, so for me, it's 1965 to 70, and we'll Google 5 historical events at that time. And then look at if there are parallels, are there any connections, or either parallels or not, conflicts within those historical events and what you got named.
Wow.
Really powerful exercise for us to think about how those events shaped our identities and potentially our names or not.
And you know something, when we do the name story, the entry point is I say, some of us have love or hate relationships with our names.
Yes.
So it's not that assumption that because you were named, I happen to be named after Yolanda King, Martin Luther King's daughter, because he was assassinated the year that I was born. So now all right, y'all, I'm outing my age.
We love it. Yes.
I happen to love my name. And in some ways, I believe that my parents named me in a way that I've walked into this legacy of loving social justice, of fighting for the rights of children and the rights of teachers in classrooms, being, born under the sign Libra. Not necessarily I'm an astrologist. I believe God created the sun, moon, and stars. So why not align with astrology? But the fact that the scales represent so it's all around me, this pursuit of justice. And so I do feel that I have been named appropriately and I love my name. But thank you for all of that. The other thing I want to talk about, Fanchon, that so beautifully came up was history. And I now want to move into the connection that I feel that your work has with mine. So this idea of archaeology of the self, there's this model that was it was helped visualized by my dear friend, Dr. Angel Acosta, another TC alum. And on the bottom of it, the very base of it is critical love. And that cannot shift for me, Fanchon. There has to be this love, this profound love and ethical commitment to the communities that we're serving. What's also in that model, if you will, that framework, is historical literacy. And so I clearly give nods to Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who talks about historical literacy, to Ibram Kendi, who's written Stamped on the Beginning and has laid out a very complicated history in this country. And this idea of historical literacy, we need to understand the history that shaped our country as we understand it, because it shapes the way neighborhoods look, the way schools look. But I also tell teachers, understand the history of the communities that you're serving in. In that zip code, in that school.
Yes.
Who were the folks that made a difference and continue to make a difference in that community? So I look at history in the broad sense that you're having us look at this. And again, 2019, last year, marked the commemoration of 400 years of dehumanization, right? The 1619 Project. So history is with us, past, present. We're forming it now for the future. So we have to have that historical context. So I want to thank you for that, because in some ways I feel so affirmed by the brilliance of your show and what I'm trying to do in this model of making sure historical context is always key.
Absolutely. And I think the thing is, it's scary and hard to look at, right? And that is part of why we've been told lies. There's part of it is conscious, and part of it is also protection of feelings and fears of what it really means to tell the truth. But we're stuck without it, right? We're stuck. We're certainly bound to repeat it. But also we cannot know our full selves without understanding that full context. One of the certainly, I think, mistakes that I've made, or ways that I've evolved, is that when I think about historical context, which is why I love you brought up in the students' communities. When I think about historical context, I often think about telling the truth about the oppressions.
Yes.
And I love your point about also telling the truth about all the people whose names we don't know of that have been so important in uplifting those communities and bringing joy.
Yes.
That is something I'm working on, because that is such an important part of love, right? That critical love is the joy and the non-dominant narrative also being aspects of joy and aspects of role models that we don't know or we don't talk about enough. So I love your point about the importance of teachers really understanding the historical context and helping the students uncover it and facilitating them around knowing the historical context of their community is such a good point.
And thank you, Fanchon, for bringing in joy. I just want to share a couple of names, and one happens to be a TC alum. So Dr. Golnasar Mohammed, who's a best friend of mine, she has this 4-layered model that schools really around the country are grabbing onto, really looking at a curriculum that can explore the criticality, the skills, the intellect, the history of our students. And she's recently added joy as a component, and recognizing that so many children go through, and I would imagine some teachers go through their teaching lives or their student lives without experiencing joy. Dr. Bettina Love, who's running the Abolitionist Teaching Network, she actually has workshops centered on joy, Black joy. What does it mean to experience joy when you're doing this work of equity, of social justice, of equality? And finally, Damaris Dunn, who graduated from TC about 2 years ago. She's now, I think, a second-year doctoral student at University of Georgia, got her grounding at TC, and she's already publishing. She just published 2 pieces around Black joy. And so we need to add that to our lexicon, as T.T. Tony Morrison told us, language matters.
Yes. So
as we add the language of joy into teaching, into being, it's the possibility of manifesting that.
Absolutely.
So, no, tell me your reaction, because I have one last thing I wanted to share about historical context. Because as I was listening to you, you made me go to this article that a friend sent me a couple of days ago that Michelle Alexander wrote, and I pulled out a quote that I wanted to share with you in the community.
Oh, I love it. Do you want to go there?
Let me go there. Let me tell you why this quote is so, I think, emblematic of the little snippet that you shared and the things that you said afterwards. This is what Michelle Alexander wrote in a New York Times article, September 21st. She said, a new nation is struggling to be born. A multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-faith, egalitarian democracy in which every life and every voice truly matters. In recent years, we've seen a glimpse of this new nation at Standing Rock, in the streets of Ferguson, in the eyes of dreamers, in the voice of teenagers from Parkland in Chicago, as well as at LGBTQ pride celebrations, the Women's March, and camps at Occupy Wall Street. Confederate statues are coming down as new memories and statues are going up in Montgomery, Alabama, and beyond, honoring victims of lynchings, as well as the courageous souls who fought for the abolition of slavery at the end of Jim Crow. And that, for me, Fanchon, is this work that you've been doing through One Drop, this telling of stories, this excavation of truths, so that we can have a new nation, a nation that is built on love, on true history, and on justice, as it should be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love coming back to TC exactly for what's happening for me right now. I'm being reminded of how entertainment work is not very deep. And I say that in the sense of, that I talked a little bit about just the fear of telling the truths and how important, especially for Hollywood, it is to start uncovering these. I'm happy to say there's an example. I think it's Showtime now has a show on the life of John Brown. So examples of heroes that, how is it that we, uplift Christopher Columbus, but not John Brown as heroes, right? So I think we're getting there, but being back at TC reminds me so much of the importance of figuring out how we marry scholastic work with kind of mainstream representations of ourselves, and the importance of kind of doing this constantly, because I will say that academic work can get mired in terminology that is not accessible to the larger audiences that we want to serve and help see themselves.
Right.
But also Hollywood is extremely limited in not paying attention to scholars and not really looking at this work. And so you're talking about all the wonderful people who are doing dissertations around joy and publishing works around that. And Michelle Alexander is a perfect example of someone that whose work is very accessible, by the way. But like, my goal here in Hollywood now is, how do I mesh these two things together?
Yes.
It's tough. And Yolanda, you are such an example of how to do this. Like, your work is so beautifully accessible and yet filled with all of the complexities and the belief in scholars that we need right now.
Yes.
The belief in scholarly work and belief in people who really dig in and do the work. And so I'm grateful to you for that. So
thank you. That, this could easily become a love fest. And I do believe that we're going to turn to Q&A soon, because the Q&A chat is on fire, and I'm excited to throw as many of these out so they can hear more.
Wait a minute. May I say something? Can you talk about Love from the Vortex?
First of all, I want to send that to you as a gift.
Oh,
I will quickly say, and I'll make the connection, that Love from the Vortex helped me find my academic voice after I lost it for 2 years. And that's a much longer story. So the idea of the arts, poetry in this sense, I've been writing poetry for 35 years, but I only called myself a poet. I'm going to say this to TC, and I'm going to talk about Jim Garner, because actually in asking me to write an inauguration poem for Dr. Tom Bailey when he was inaugurated in 2018, that was my coming out as a poet, although I had been writing for 30-something years. And that did something to my spirit, certainly, and loved the poem, loved the idea, studied T.T. Maya Angelou to really understand what an inauguration poem was. But Love from the Vortex is the gift that keeps on giving. And Fanchen, thank you for asking, because I've heard so many people, and so many people have written to me telling me how much it has offered them solace during the pandemic, that it has allowed them a portal for healing. And ultimately, that's what I want. I want that in my teaching, and I want to be known for that. Yes. So I thank you for that. That's maybe a conversation we can have in detail, because I actually spilled the tea, the coffee, the water, everything. But I will tell you, that was a project of liberation. And talk about stories and truth telling, we must be liberated. The lies will become exposed.
That's the goal, isn't it? The goal is liberation. And that's what love looks like, right? Yes. That is actually love, is that we are liberated, right? Liberation is like, yes.
And so, that's Love from the Vortex.
May I speak it, that the next time you and I are together, you're front and center, and I'm having the conversation with you and asking you questions about Love from the Vortex. I'm going to speak that out loud. Rosella, if you want to get on that for
I receive it. And I also receive these incredible questions, because I want them to hear from you. Fanchen, let me just say, if I don't say it before we leave, thank you for being who you are, for being part of the TC community. You give us so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, TC. I love you all. I'm here for you.
Here we go. So let me see if I can get my computer working. And I need to get to the top. Here we go. Bobby Robania says, Fenchen's conception of truth seems to describe it as being something counter-narrative to a perceived dominant narrative. Sounds like we have some critical race theory coming in here, right?
There we go, yes.
My conception of truth is such that it is an objective pursuit no matter where it leads. Physicists pursue truth in science, for example, without the dominant narrative frame. That means there is no binary of dominant, oppressed, etc., but instead using enlightened tools to pursue whatever could be true. Here's the question. How is the non-dominant narrative conception of truth more sufficient in understanding the world around us?
Well, I'm glad that you used the example of scientists, because I think even when we examine the science that we believe in, and I'm all about, as I mentioned with Yolanda, I'm all about trusting in folks who have done work. So, I'm all about listening to the work of scholars and figuring out how to make that work accessible as stories in Hollywood. But the scientists we listen to are also limited based on access to resources, based on their relationship with racism, with sexism, with gender identity. So even in that case, if I'm answering your question correctly or understanding it correctly, that is still not objective. I liken it to because we've all come to see white as the default for human being. White people often think that their conceptions of racism are coming from an objective point of view, right. And they're not. They're not objective. They are based on their racialization as white. So I think scientists are also they can't be objective. Have this bias in what we believe, and that's what I'm saying we have to push back on. And certainly when it comes to race and racism, we have to push back on that.
Yes, yeah, and I want to say that is for me where archaeology of the self comes in. And there is a quick question. I really want to have questions focused for you, but I will say just a quick connection.
Yes.
Particularly for teachers in service and pre-service, they're going to continue to go through a lot of professional learning around race, around racism, and so forth. You can sit in 1,000 seminars, but if you do not do the self-work, if you do not prepare your heart and prepare your mind for something different than how you were socialized, and here I'm specifically speaking to white brothers and sisters, white folks. Yeah. If you continue to see, as Bettina Love posted on her Instagram, white supremacy as something that you don't have to dismantle, but something that you have to just empathize with for Black people, it will not be dismantled. We're talking about 4 centuries deep of this. Yeah. So it is going to require that each human, every individual, do work to dismantle it. And you have to do the self-work to know, what are you giving up when you begin that dismantling? What are you most afraid of losing? There's so much to gain, but what are you going to lose?
So much to gain.
So it first starts with the question, where does it live in you? Harriet asked a question, and Harriet, I don't know the answer, but I will look into it. She asked about a TC alumna who developed a curriculum that spotlights the inherent intelligence of students. I need to look into that.
Okay.
Here's a question from Addie. She says, can you talk about the role of mindfulness and gratitude in storytelling?
Oh my goodness. Well, I meditate every morning, and so wow. I think it's an extremely useful and important tool to utilize mindfulness before you tell your story, because I think it gives you moments to really pause and reflect inwards and allow the breath just to be your guide. Having said that, so for example, now we have all these apps, right, where you can use, and I use one of them to help guide me. The voices are all voiced by white people, and we're working towards changing that. So even the concept of mindfulness right now, the majority of mindfulness training that we look at is from a white lens, even though traditionally, historically, it was not, but it's been kind of co-opted. So that's a perfect example of something else that is both I think a tool that is important to use, but also to remain critical about in the sense of being open to examining what more there is. What, right? It's that same question of in what ways am I limited in my mindfulness uses in telling my story because they've been given to me through a very specific lens, a limited lens.
Wow. Wow. I just want to hear you talk on and on. I'm looking at the time. I want to fit in a couple of more questions so we can have as much as you as possible. Emily asked, what does self-care look like for each of you? And that's from Pascal in the audience. I want to say this is a moment of self-care. That's my quick answer. Being in a community with someone who loves art, is an artist, loves social justice, loves the idea of equity, and is not afraid. So being in community with people like that, as well as other things I do, I also meditate. I pray. I'm doing my best to eat right and drink water right by my side. I turn it over to you, Fanchen. What does self-care look like for you?
Yeah. So yeah, kind of on a macro level, certainly nutrition has been really important. I'm vegan or plant-based, however you want to refer to it. And I became vegan about 4 years ago and noticed, especially doing the show, because it was kind of, I did half of my time doing the show as a non-vegan and the other half as plant-based. And I noticed a huge difference in terms of just the energy and being able to kind of get back up afterwards. I also will say that I found an incredible Black and brown community of vegans, and that mattered to me too, because I was worried about even that being limited in the ways I'd have to be critical about that. And so, that helps me find community is being vegan and drinking a lot of water too, and getting all the sleep I can. And obviously, during this pandemic, that's been so hard for all of us, not to mention the elections coming up. And speaking of community, we talked very briefly, but I have a podcast called Sister Brunch. And this is this incredible opportunity for women working in entertainment and media, Black women plus, so cisgender, transgender, non-binary, to come together and talk about, first of all, share narratives of how they got to where they are, but also talk about what it's like to be them in this community and environment. And so same thing, Yolanda, being here with you, talking to my mom. I will mention, because my parents are such an integral part of my show, that both of my parents are now suffering from dementia. And so they would never have been able to share the stories now or even relate to them that I share in the show. So every time I get to play my parents, it's this incredible form of self-care, which is just to be able to remind myself of who they were and still are, but can't express it in those ways. And that takes me full circle back to what you said in the beginning, which is, my goodness, tell your story, because your story matters. Like, telling your story is a huge form of self-care. So.
And we have 2 minutes to go. I just want to thank those of you who submitted a question and we did not get to it, but hopefully there will be a part 2. But I want to ask this last question that comes from Jessica, because I think it beautifully connects to what you just shared. And I want to tell you that what you said about your parents gave me chills in the moment, and just something that I needed to hear, as my mother is still with me. Thank you for that reminder. But I'm going to end with this question, where Jessica says, what does experiencing joy mean to you?
It's this smile that just spread across my face. It's this incredible physical response.
Yes.
That, a physical response to happiness and something that's funny or loving or ridiculous. Or I think ultimately it's with this physical response
Mm-hmm.
that just feels great.
And peaceful. I feel
Yes.
incredible peace. This brings me to our last minute, and I want to pass that minute back to you, Fanchen. I want to take my few seconds to thank the TC community, our alums, Rosella, Elisa, all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be in community with Fanchen and all of you. And I yield the last moments to you.
Oh, I want to express my gratitude and love to all of you. I know how challenging it was, and also affirming and joyful to teach when I was there at TC. And I cannot begin to imagine how challenging it is to, on top of the things that all the work that you do and all the energy you put into it, to also have to do it virtually or have to go in person and take all the risks you're taking. So I don't even know how to begin to thank you for what you are doing for the future of all of us. But I am so, so grateful to you. And I make sure Hollywood is grateful to you too. Oh my God. We're actually working on a show about teachers, and I'm like, look, I'm gonna get some real teachers in here to make sure.
We're here whenever you need us.
Believe me, I will be calling on you. And I'm so grateful to you, Rosella, Lisa, to Tom Bailey. I'm Stephanie. I have to say hi to Stephanie Rowley. I don't know if you're on, but I love you, girl, and congratulations. And really, you all are so important. What you're doing is so important. Hang in there, and I'm just so grateful.
Thank you, community, for being with us. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Enjoy the rest of the festival, and have a great weekend ahead. Take care.
Take care.